Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. It's day 2 of the tribunal into allegations of abuse by some staff members of the Immaculata Day School in Burns Lake, British Columbia. Our Lee Wilson and Kathleen Martins are on the ground in this, the first tribunal the Canadian Human Rights Commission ever held outside of Ottawa. Kathleen, good to see you. Can you give us an update on the latest from the tribunal?
For sure, Dennis. Here in Burns Lake, it's day 2 of a 10-day hearing, 2-week hearing, excuse me. Human Rights Tribunal hearing into alleged abuse of children at the Immaculata Day School. Things heated up this morning when a lawyer for the survivors said the RCMP haven't turned over a key piece of evidence, and that's a taped interview with Richard Perry. He's a hereditary chief. He was of course, a young boy at Immaculata. He went for several grades. He talked about being abused on a nearly daily basis by nuns and a teacher at the school.
Kathleen, like you say, it's only day 2, but what's been sticking out for you so far?
More people are coming out from the community to sit in the audience and listen. That's partly why it's being held here in Burns Lake, so that the survivors can be heard and supported by their communities. They're from Burns Lake and Lake Babine First Nations. The testimony also is getting a little more explicit. These are adults, of course, remembering what happened to them as children at day school. But Richard Perry says he suffered, learning disabilities, potentially brain damage, by being struck in the head repeatedly with a ruler. He has scars that he said he showed his dad and his grandparents. He had a lot of difficulty, even being able to speak today. He talks in a kind of a halting voice. So I think what stuck out for me today was just the impact of the abuse. How it stayed with this man who's now in his 50s.
Kathleen, what's anticipated over the next few weeks here?
Certainly more survivors are going to testify, and then others who heard their story helped amplify it throughout Canada. And the reason they're here, and that's because when they went to police with their allegations, the RCMP, in their opinion, did a really half-hearted attempt at an investigation. Today, Richard Perry testified. They talked to him for 24 minutes about about abuse he suffered over 3-4 years. And they say that's proof of how the RCMP didn't take their allegations seriously. And we're going to hear more of that from further witnesses over the next 2 weeks.
Kathleen, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks for the work you and Lee are doing out there.
You're welcome, Dennis.
The family of an 8-year-old girl have had their worst fears realized this week as a report of a missing Indigenous girl has turned into tragedy. According to an autopsy by the Edmonton medical examiner, the cause of death was blunt impact trauma, and it has been ruled a homicide. APTN's Danielle Parody has more.
The Edmonton Police Service worked with the RCMP to locate the remains of a young girl on Samson Cree Nation in Musketchees, about 85 kilometers outside of Edmonton, on Saturday. The girl was missing from Edmonton since March 22nd. The girl and her family cannot be named under a publication ban. The family told APTN News that they are working to get the publication ban lifted. The child's aunt and grandmother spoke to APTN. They said it was difficult to get information from the police about what was happening throughout the ordeal. They have also told us they feel shocked and broken at this horrific turn of events. A 27-year-old woman has been accused of first-degree murder and committing an indignity to a body, and a 66-year-old man and 25-year-old man are accused of accessory to first-degree murder and an indignity to a body. All of the charges are from the Edmonton Police. None of the charges have been proven in court. In the early evening of April 24th, 2023, Edmonton Police Service did a wellness check at the house of a 27-year-old woman who had been caring for the 8-year-old girl. Due to suspicious circumstances, police began a homicide investigation. EPS said that they worked with the RCMP and other agency partners to search for the young girl's remains. The Edmonton Police Service have said that all of the accused were known to the girl. The same evening her remains were discovered, there was over 100 people at a rally supporting the family on Saturday. Danielle Parody, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Missing or murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit in Canada is in a state of crisis. And when it comes to action, the Liberal government has failed. That's according to a number of members of Parliament and advocates who held a press conference in Ottawa today. Annette Francis was there.
They gathered in the foyer of West Block 3 days before Red Dress Day. NDP MP Leah Gazan took the lead in the call for action.
I am standing alongside my sisters today to support them in their calls on the government to fully support a Canada-wide emergency, immediately support the development of a national red dress alert system without delay.
In February, Gazan called for the implementation of a red dress alert to notify the public when an Indigenous girl, woman, or Two-Spirit person goes missing, but it has not been implemented. At the presser, Gazan urged the government to
immediately implement a housing and social support for children aging out of care so they are not aging out onto the streets.
And to create a guaranteed livable income and to immediately carry out prevention measures. An emotional Nikki Kumatsi-Utuksa says there is no justice. Her sister Jessica Michaels was murdered 22 years ago near Winnipeg. She wants immediate supports for the missing and murdered.
We need to stand together in solidarity with all of our Indigenous families and communities across the country to ensure that our women and girls are being taken care of. Identity is at the core of who we are as Indigenous people. We must ensure that we are doing our very best as not-for-profit organizations that support our communities to ensure that we have secure funding to be able to help our women and girls through this national tragedy.
Mohawk human rights activist Ellen Gabriel said it's intolerable. She says some of the root causes are due to racism.
I was a child in the 60s and 70s, and I heard about racist education, anti-racist education. Here we are in 2023, and there is no anti-racism education in this country. There is no learning about Canada's colonial past. If you ask any member of Parliament right now, do you know Canada's colonial past, and I would bet good money on that they do not know about human rights and they do not know about colonial history and the impacts of genocide upon the Indigenous families of this land, of Turtle Island.
Gazan brought up the issue again during question period. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller responded.
This is a tragedy, but doing public policy by tragedy only leads to tragic results. I only can direct people to the final report on missing murdered Indigenous women and girls to see the systematic work that needs to be done.
After question period, Gazan tabled the motion.
A, declare the continued loss of Indigenous women, girls, trans women, Two-Spirit people a Canada-wide emergency, and B, provide immediate and substantial investment, including a red dress alert, to help alert the public when an Indigenous woman, girl, trans woman, Two-Spirit person goes missing.
It was carried unanimously, but the motion doesn't force the government to do anything immediately. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
To the East Coast now, where two Mi'kmaq fishers were in Dartmouth Provincial Court today, facing fishery charges for harvesting baby eels. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans stopped the lucrative fishery back in 2020 due to violence. The fishers say they were exercising their treaty rights. Angel Moore reports.
I'm here outside the Dartmouth Provincial Court, where Kevin Bernard and Craig Baptiste of the Eskazoni First Nation are facing fishery charges stemming from May 5th, 2020, for allegedly harvesting baby eels known as albers. They can be worth up to $5,000 a kilogram. During that time, the DFO had put a pause on the alber fishery due to unrest and violence. Defense lawyer Jeremiah Rainingbird says the Mi'kmaq fishery should take precedence.
It's disheartening that the federal crown would take these cases through prosecution and force individuals from Mi'kmaq communities to devote significant time and resources to essentially answering the question of am I Mi'kmaq, and have that being proven in court.
The Crown's witness, a fisheries officer, testified the basis of the arrest was a net and an empty bucket. An expert testified photos taken by fisheries officers were albers. Rainingbird requested the judge throw out the expert's testimony as the testimony was based on photos. Presiding Judge Jill Hartland will make that decision tomorrow when court resumes with closing arguments. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
Thanks, Angel. The United States continues to reckon with the legacy of boarding schools. We'll tell you about a new initiative south of the Medicine Line after the break. Welcome back. The United States government has a new interagency partnership with the goal to recognize the troubled legacy of boarding schools. Similar to Canada, over 400 residential schools, more commonly known as boarding schools, were in operation across the United States between the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Now the Interior Department and National Endowment for the Humanities are putting up $4 million into a new project. The two agencies will expand the federal boarding school initiative through the collection of oral histories of survivors and their descendants. The project will also focus on digitizing boarding schools' records to ensure stories and experiences of survivors can be shared and learned from by future generations. Officials say the U.S. government has never undertaken a project of this kind before. Shelley C. Lowe is the chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities and a citizen of the Navajo Nation. She joins us now. Shelley, thanks so much for taking some time for us.
Thank you.
Can you explain how this initiative came to be and what it will entail?
Sure. As you know, in June of 2021, Secretary Howland announced the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative that would be launched by the Department of the Interior. After almost a year, in May of 2022, Volume 1 of that report was released, which laid the groundwork and the continued work of the initiative. After that report was released, it became very clear that the National Endowment for the Humanities was the perfect agency to be supporting this initiative. So the initiative and the work that the Department of the Interior and National Endowment for the Humanities will be focusing on is digitizing the records and documenting the students in history of the U.S. Federal Indian Boarding School and collecting oral histories of former students as part of the Department of the Interior's Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative and their listening sessions.
Can you tell us a bit about the impacts of these policies of the federal boarding schools and how Indigenous communities in the United States were impacted, and if they still feel those impacts today?
The May 2022 report from the Department of the Interior highlights some of the impacts that are initially found within searching through some of the records. Those include language loss, cultural loss, separation of children from families. Many of these issues we hear in some of the experiences that survivors are sharing with us in listening sessions. But as we try to go into the records and digitize more of them, more of that information will be coming forward.
How will this initiative help address the intergenerational impacts of boarding schools?
It'll help us to be able to provide an avenue for students who had attended the boarding schools to talk about their experiences and tell their stories. It allows us to acknowledge and examine this history, not just by documenting student stories and experiences, but by preserving this history, rescuing it, and making it available to all so we can learn from it.
Shelley, we'll leave it there, but we wish you all the best with the work ahead. Thanks for taking some time.
Thank you so much.
A Swampy Cree filmmaker and writer will have a documentary she is co-directing shown at a very prestigious festival. We'll hear from her after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Clarence Jones sent in this close-up shot of a hummingbird arriving for spring's first sip from a feeder on Clarence's porch in Gitxsan territory. Beautiful colors. Thanks, Clarence. Spring has sprung, and we want your best spring photos. You can send them to share@aptn.ca to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, +7 with showers in Halifax, rain, and 8 for Fredericton. 15 in Kuujjuaq, 3 with showers in Nain. 9 and rain for Montreal, rain, and 13 for Val-d'Or. Cloudy and 7 for Sault Ste. Marie, rain, and 8 in North Bay. Showers for Thunder Bay with a high of 7, 12 with rain in Sioux Lookout. 14 with rain in God's Lake, sunny, and 14 for Norway House. 22 in Winnipeg, Gimli, and Dauphin. Sunny at 24 for Regina, 26 under the sun in North Battleford. Sunny at 19 in La Ronge, 25 and sunny for Meadow Lake. In northern Alberta, sunny and 28 for High Level, Peace River, and Fort McMurray. 29 in Edmonton and Lethbridge. 19 in Vancouver, showers, and 29 for Kamloops. Sunny and 24 for Prince George, cloudy and 17 in Smithers. 5 in Old Crow, 8 in Whitehorse. 16 for Yellowknife, +3 in Norman Wells. -1 with snow in Sax Harbor, cloudy, and +4 for Paulatuk. -2 with snow in Chesterfield, +1 and snow in Whale Cove. -6 with flurries in Resolute, 2 below, and snow in Joe Haven. A group of aspiring wrestlers traveling and performing in First Nations in northern Manitoba will be premiering at the famed Cannes Film Festival next month. The gig and the documentary is called The Death Tour, and it is co-directed by Winnipeg-based Swampy Cree filmmaker and writer Sonia Ballantyne, who spoke with Daryl earlier.
Sonia, thank you so much for joining us here today. My first question for you is, can you just tell us about the Death Tour and why you thought it would make for a great film?
So the Death Tour is so named because it is a tour of northern Manitoba, communities that are only accessible by ice roads. And it's called that just because of the incredible difficulty of traveling 12 hours a day to wrestle after you put up the ring and sleep in the same place your ring is. So I was always fascinated by it because one of my favorite wrestlers, Edge of the WWE, went on such a tour back in the 90s. And I met him when I was a little girl in my hometown of Grand Rapids, Mississippi as it's known now. And it was just fascinating to me to meet a wrestler, like an actual wrestler in my hometown, and it made wrestling so real to me. So I've always been fascinated by wrestling, and having this opportunity to create a documentary about something that is so tied to Indigenous communities and Canadian history was something that was really a big draw for me.
Well, and also one thing with this documentary, it's going to be at a very special film festival. I understand your documentary is still in production, in progress, and it's going to showcase mid-May. Can you tell us about where this documentary is going to be and how exciting that is for you?
It is. The Death Tour is currently, is going to be a part of the Docs in Progress at the Cannes Film Festival. Their program called Cannes Docs is where it's specifically going to take place. And it's really exciting because I often have I try to downplay or try to belittle my dreams for projects. So even though I adored the Death Tour and I adored being on it, I thought that because of its content focusing on wrestling and focusing on Indigenous folks, and it's still we're often still belittled and such. So having it be accepted into one of the most prestigious film festivals in the world, even when it's still in progress, was still pretty cool for me. And I'm really excited to go to France and hopefully meet Pedro Pascal while I'm there. We'll see what happens. But I'm just excited to be considered to have something I created be considered so artistic that it's good to be there.
Well, it is super exciting. And one more question for you here. Now, you wrote an episode for the comedy Acting Good as well, and that's airing on APTN right now. That episode was also happened to be about wrestling. What is it about wrestling that's so important for you?
Well, I think it always has to do with specifically how you can make yourself a hero in wrestling. Like, if you are, even if you have the least amount of wrestling physicality talent, if you can talk yourself up and if you can make yourself a legend, that's something that the accessibility of it was always something I really, really love. I also love how committed people are to it when they become either wrestling fans or wrestlers in general. On the Death Tour, I was very fascinated by the commitment a lot of the wrestlers had, specifically the promoter, Tony Condello, who has been putting the tour on for the last 50 years. And just that devotion to their art form was something that always inspired me.
Well, Sonia, certainly wish you the best of luck and everything with your documentary going forward. I certainly can't wait to see it myself. So we'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your day today to speak with us.
Thank you.
Fred and heard a lot about the Death Tour over the years. Really looking forward to that documentary and hearing more about Sonia's Bluey Pin. The chief of Neskantaga First Nation in Northern Ontario was recently removed from the Ontario legislature for calling out the Premier during question period. Christopher Muniz wants to meet Doug Ford to discuss the massive mineral deposit known as the Ring of Fire. In 2018, Ford famously said a road connecting the Ring of Fire to the provincial grid was going to get built, even if he had to hop on a bulldozer himself.
Easy just to hop on a bulldozer and bulldoze our territory. I mean, we have a lot of discussions. We have a lot of things to talk about. We have a long way to go before anything like this happens. You know, we have our rights, we have our inherent rights, we have our laws, we have our community protocols that needs to be respected.
And you can catch our entire interview with Neskantaga First Nation Chief Muniz in just a few minutes' time. They're also under the longest boil water advisory in Canadian history. Be sure to join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when Daryl will be putting First Nations emergency services in focus. But that's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Go Leafs. Have a great night.